This is not a story about a visa rejection. This is a story about a passenger detained, mocked, and humiliated in a major international airport for being from Arunachal Pradesh, India. An Indian citizen residing in the UK for 14 years was traveling from London Gatwick to Osaka, Japan, with a transit stop in Shanghai, China. What should have been a simple 3-hour layover turned into an 18-hour interrogation and harassment inside an airport terminal. He had all valid travel documents, including an Indian passport and boarding passes. He had even previously transited through Shanghai with no issues and had confirmed with the Chinese embassy in London that, for a short layover, no visa was required. But this time something changed. At the e-gates, he was singled out by a Chinese immigration officer. India? Not India. China, your passport not valid, the officer repeated while removing him from the queue. No explanation, no documentation, no due process. He was denied re-entry into the transit queue and placed under immigration hold. When he asked why, multiple officers repeated the same line. Arunachal is not part of India. You are Chinese. Apply for Chinese passport. Some officers mocked him and laughed. They called Arunachal Pradesh China, not India. He was then shuttled repeatedly between immigration counters and airline desks with no clear instructions and no legal paperwork. For 18 hours, no food provided, no place to rest, no access to working Wi-Fi, blocked from calling family, restricted from leaving that part of the terminal. Even with a connection to Wi-Fi, Google, WhatsApp, Facebook, all blocked, preventing any communication. When he demanded legal justification, asking, "What rule allows you to detain me? What regulation prevents Indian nationals from transit?" Immigration officers refused to answer and simply turned away. At one stage, 5 to 6 airline and immigration staff openly mocked him, pointing at his documents, repeating Arunachal China, not India, and laughing. Is that immigration control or state-sponsored intimidation? Finally, after demanding legal representation and access to phone services, he was allowed to make a call from a landline to a friend in London. With assistance from contacts and the Indian embassy, he was finally permitted to leave China. 18 hours after landing, he never got an explanation. He never received a written notice of refusal. He was simply placed on a flight out of Shanghai. This incident raises critical global questions. Can a sovereign passport be invalidated based on geopolitics? Can a transit passenger be legally detained without explanation? What protections exist for travelers when political disputes cross into airports? For millions of passengers, especially Indian citizens from Arunachal Pradesh, this case is a warning. Airports are supposed to be neutral international ground, but when immigration becomes a geopolitical weapon, ordinary travelers pay the price. This is not just a travel story. It is a story about identity, dignity, and the abuse of power at an international border. If you or anyone you know has faced discrimination or harassment while traveling, your voice matters, because international rules mean nothing if countries can break them without consequences. What happened inside Shanghai's airport that night wasn't just an immigration decision. It was a concerted attempt to rewrite someone's identity inside an international terminal. In modern aviation, transit passengers are among the most protected classes of travelers. They are not entering a foreign country. They are simply passing through, protected by international civil aviation rules and ICAO standards, the same standards China is legally bound to. Yet here was a valid passport holder, traveling from one country to another, being detained, interrogated, mocked, and psychologically cornered, not because of security, not because of visa compliance, not because of a travel violation, but because of an international border dispute thousands of miles away. This wasn't immigration screening, this was geopolitical punishment. When you strip away the uniforms and the counters, airports are supposed to represent order, clarity, and structure. There is a process, there are regulations, there is documentation. Travelers depend on that. That night in Shanghai, none of that existed. He was not told what regulation he had violated, what category he was being held under, whether he was being deported or refused transit, whether he would be sent back or forward, or when he would be released. Everything was non-verbal pressure, a silent but chilling message. You have no rights here. Every hour that passed had the same ritual. He approached the counter, asked for clarification, asked for the rules, asked for the policy, and was dismissed, waved away, or laughed at. That's how helplessness is manufactured, not through force, but through silence and uncertainty. The deliberate information blackout, the lack of Wi-Fi was not just inconvenience. In that airport, it was a tool. Without internet, you cannot search your legal rights. You cannot identify your consulate's contact number. You cannot alert your airline's headquarters, and you cannot speak to family inside China, even when the Wi-Fi briefly connects. Google doesn't work, Gmail doesn't work, WhatsApp doesn't work, social platforms don't work. So the human being being detained gradually becomes invisible. Hours pass, no food, no sleep, no answers. Fatigue sets in, panic sets in. The goal is simple: break resistance. Every time he asked for information, the reply was either go to the airline, go to immigration. Neither side took responsibility because the process only worked if he had no process to follow. He was not meant to comply. He was meant to give up. The laughter, the most damaging weapon. People often think humiliation is not a tactic. Ask anyone who has been through an interrogation. It is. Mockery is not casual, it is calculated. When officers pointed and repeated Arunachal, China, not India, while laughing, they weren't asserting geography. They were asserting dominance. The message was, your identity is not yours to choose. We decide what you are. That crosses every line of international conduct, not just aviation law, not just immigration rules, but basic human dignity. The bigger picture and why it matters. This is not an isolated incident. Arunachal Pradesh is an Indian state that China claims as its territory. India rejects that completely. That's a geopolitical disagreement. But no matter what two governments argue about, the international system is built on one foundational rule: travelers are not the battleground. A border dispute between countries does not give immigration officers the right to mock passengers, apply political labels to identities, reinterpret sovereign passports, punish civilians for territorial disputes. Once passports become negotiable, travel becomes insecurity. If one country can say your passport is invalid because we disagree with your state's borders, what stops another country from doing the same? If international travel becomes a theater for political intimidation, then every traveler, Indian, American, British, African, Asian, loses something fundamental: the right to move across borders without being bullied for geopolitics. The aftershock, the trauma that remains. Yes, he eventually got out, but freedom after humiliation does not erase humiliation. Imagine flying 12 hours from London only to be told your country doesn't exist, be mocked for your birthplace, be treated as less than a person, be denied the right to call your own family, be prevented from sleeping or eating, be treated as suspicious without a cause. Imagine the emotional state of boarding the next flight to Japan, eyes open but unable to rest, mind racing but no energy left to argue. You've technically been released, but psychologically, you are still detained. This incident did not just inconvenience a traveler, it rattled his sense of identity, something no government has the right to do. Airports are supposed to represent connection, not control. Borders are supposed to represent sovereignty, not humiliation. Passports are supposed to represent identity, not vulnerability. If we accept silence, this will become normal. But if we speak, if travelers, media, and governments demand accountability, we protect not just one nationality, but every traveler who believes that movement is a human right, not a privilege granted by power.